In this video, we're going to do a quick walkthrough of some of the basic features of LightBurn. So what you're looking at is the default layout of LightBurn's interface. I have already gone through the device setup. If you haven't done that, you should. So what you see here are the toolbars with the various options that you get for drawing and arranging your shapes. LightBurn has all of these items that you see here also listed in the menus, and if you look at the items in the menus, they have all of their hotkeys listed. So if you, like me, like hotkeys, these are handy. The basics are create a new file, open an existing file, save the file you have, import. Import takes graphics from an external vector file like an Adobe Illustrator file or a PDF file, SVGs or DXFs. You'll probably be using this button more than just about anything. You can also use drag and drop. So for example, I can use the import button to bring in one of my graphics. I can also just grab it from my file explorer or finder, and wherever you drop it in LightBurn is where the graphic goes. Undo and redo are here. If you look in the menu, you can see what the last action I performed was. If I draw, I can see I created an ellipse. If I undo that, now the last action is import the LightBurn dragon. So you can tell what it is that you need, or what you're undoing and redoing. Cut, copy, and paste and delete are pretty straightforward. They work very similar to other tools. If I copy and then move my cursor and paste, wherever the cursor happens to be is where the paste goes. If you use the copy and paste buttons on the toolbar or menu items, your paste lands with an offset from the original. It doesn't go where the cursor is because the cursor is not on the page, but it shifts it slightly to one side so you can see it. If you don't want that to happen, you can use the duplicate option. Duplicate creates an exact copy of something in place. So if I select the dragon again, hit Control D to duplicate, you can see that my new copy is exactly on top of the old one. Delete, destroy, or throws away your graphic. Obviously, I can undo and redo to get everything back. The backspace key or delete key will also do that. Zoom and frame are useful. If I click them here, they zoom relative to the center of the page. You can also use your mouse scroll wheel to zoom in relative to where the cursor is. So if I draw a shape over here, I can zoom in relative to that shape by just pointing at it. Ditto for down here. So that's useful for navigation as well. If you hold the middle mouse button, you can drag the view and pan around. LightBurn also has a frame key, which will allow you to frame whatever your current project is or whatever your current selection is. So if I select this graphic here and say frame, it brings it to fill the window. If I don't select anything and I say frame, it frames the entirety of my document. So those are useful navigation tools. Preview will show you a preview of what your current cut looks like. So it basically just lets you walk through what your laser is going to do. You can also show traversal moves. I think that's on by default, in fact. So I can see here the laser came in from the origin, starts drawing the eye, then does the outline shape. When that's finished, it goes over and does the circle. The preview is adaptive, so if I move these two things closer together and bring it up again, the preview just starts with those shapes filled. You can also zoom in and out, pan around in the preview like you can in the regular edit window, and if you double click the preview, it resets. These shaped, or pardon me, these tools up here allow you to do things like mirror and arrange. So I can vertical mirror, horizontal mirror. If you have more than one thing chosen, for example, if I wanted to perfectly center the LightBurn dragon in this circle or move the circle around the LightBurn dragon, I can align the centers of the selected objects horizontally or vertically. You can also do things like align the left or right edges, top and bottom edges. So these are really useful for placement, making sure that things line up properly. And then the make same width and make same height tools allow you to stretch shapes to match. So if I line up the middles and say I want to make these two things the same width, I can perfectly fill this. This is useful for text. For example, if I use my text tool and type LightBurn and I wanted to make sure that that was perfectly the same width as my shape, click it and you can see that it now matches. That messes with the aspect ratio. If you want that not to happen, if you hold Shift while you make the same width, it actually makes them the same width but locks the aspect in place, and so that's also useful. In general, a lot of the hotkey modifiers you won't see, so like holding Control or Shift sometimes do special things. You won't see those called out in the menu items, but they are in the help and notes. If you go to hotkeys, you'll see that stuff all listed here. And it's also in the documentation, which we now have online. Over here, we have the basic shape creation tools. The pen tool lets you draw lines. The lines will snap to existing vertices, so and objects as well, actually. So if you have a need to draw a line in exactly a particular location, for example, if I wanted to start a line right at the end of this tip, LightBurn automatically snaps it. So the further I zoom in, you can see that's actually really accurate. It will auto snap to vertexes on an existing shape, as well as center points on shapes. So if I need lines to be exact, I can place a couple of circles or squares or something like that where I want the line center or line points to go. And you can see as I get to the middle of these shapes, the lines snap. So you can use the existing drawing tools to sort of create your own guides for things. It ends up being fairly helpful. And then when I'm done and I want to get rid of these, I can just select them and delete. LightBurn also has two different selection modes. One is what's called an enclosing selection. So if I draw from top down and let go of this rectangle, only the shapes contained in that rectangle are selected. If I draw from bottom up and let go, the shapes that cross that selection rectangle are selected. And so that's useful if you're trying to grab something that's outside of the screen. For example, if I was zoomed in like this, it's very difficult for me to draw an enclosing rectangle around the dragon, but it's really easy for me to cross over it. And you can also, of course, use just straight click to select. The crossing selection and the click selection also use the Shift key to add items to the selection, the Control key to toggle items in the selection, and then the combination of Control and Shift is to remove. So also over here, so rectangle and ellipse, we've already seen those. When you're creating rectangles or ellipses, holding the Shift key locks the aspect, so you get a perfect square or a perfect circle. Holding the Control key creates them from the center out instead of from the corner. So if I click right here in the middle of the LightBurn dragon and I wanted to put a circle around it, holding the Control key lets me drag the circle from center out instead of from one of the corners. This is the node editing tool. So if you have a shape selected and you go into node editing mode, you can move the vertices of the shape around. You can also convert a shape from hard lines like this to smooth lines by hitting S over a highlighted point. That creates tangent handles at that vertex and lets you manipulate those. And then we have the text tool, which again you've already seen, but you can click existing text and edit it. You can also modify things like the font on the fly. So as I scroll through or bring up the font selection box, you can see that the text changes in real time, and modifications of size and so on do the same thing. So it's useful. You can just click here and edit, as well as changing where the text is aligned. So I want it to be from where I selected aligned on the left edge, where I selected aligned on the right edge, or centered, which is the default. Also over here we have the click to locate laser tool. This is when you have a laser connected. Basically you select this tool and clicking anywhere on the page will jog the laser to that location, which is useful if you're trying to line up a cut. And then we have the offsetting tool, which is one of my personal favorites. Let me clean this up a little bit. Offset is really cool for doing organic shapes. So if I wanted to wrap this in something like an outline, click offset, and then as I increase the offset distance, you'll see that the offset shape is basically just a shape that is some distance from my selection. LightBurn will generate new graphics at the exact distance from your original source shapes. And you can also use the mouse wheel to just create that or move it dynamically. When you have something you like, hit OK. The resulting shape is grouped automatically. So if I go back to there, if I do a smaller one, here you can see I'm getting some inside shape now, inside the dragon, and here inside this lettering. If I make it just a little bit bigger, that little bit inside the dragon I probably don't want. That will be part of this shape as a group. If I ungroup the shape by clicking here or using the ungroup hotkey, now I can delete those straggly bits out of there. That's most of the creation tools and alignment tools. You also have the sizing tools here, so I can size and move by numeric controls, for example. So if I wanted to make sure that the center of this text was exactly aligned with the center of the dragon, you can see that the LightBurn dragon is at 350. The text isn't. If I type in 350, the text lines up perfectly. This is your preview. You've already seen that. This will give you an exact walkthrough of the cut that LightBurn is going to send to the laser. So it's a good way to figure out if everything is going to cut in the order that you want it to, and figure out whether it's doing an optimal job or not. Over here in the laser panel, there's an optimization settings button and the optimize cut path button. So if I turn off optimization and I preview, LightBurn will draw things in whatever order you created them in, and that's not necessarily the order that you want. So for example, if you look at this G, it's drawing the outline and then drawing the inside shapes. Generally that's inadvisable. What will often happen is if you cut out a letter and then you cut the holes in the letter will shift a little bit as it's released from the material. So you usually want to cut inside shapes first. That's one of the options here. So cut inner shapes first, cut in layer order, reduce travel moves, all of these options you can change, and the preview will reflect those changes. So I've turned on the cut in inside out order, and so now you can see it cuts the middle pieces of the G followed by the outline. And it'll do the same thing over here for the B, and so on. Optimization settings are a really good way to reduce the time it takes to do a cut. If I turn off all optimizations and bring up the preview, you can see LightBurn estimates how long that job is going to take and how much distance it moved. So in this case, 971 millimeters worth of rapid moves, which isn't bad. But if I had a more complicated scene, Let's get rid of this. And there. So I'm going to shrink this down. It's also worth noting this lock is the aspect lock. So whenever I change width or height here, either as a measurement or a percentage, with that lock button clicked or selected, it will lock the aspect ratio. So if I wanted to make this 125% of its size, it grows in both directions. If I disable the lock and shrink it, you can see now the aspect ratio isn't preserved. So this is a useful tool as well. With this, if I leave my optimization settings off and draw my cut plan, you can see that there's lots and lots and lots and lots of red. That's the rapid moves moving from one shape to another. In fact, it's actually doing more rapid movement than it is cutting, which is pretty terrible. If I go to optimization settings and say cut inner shapes first and reduce travel moves, that's the big one. Bringing up the preview now shows that now there's significantly less rapid movement than there is cut movement. And if you scrub through the preview, you can see that it's generally moving from shape to shape that are close to each other. This does a really good job of speeding up your cut, making the overall cut time lower. And it will still do the proper inside to outside shape planning, and so on and so on. You can turn all of these on. For the most part, there is not really a reason to leave them off. Cut in layer order is kind of a special one. If I have things that I want to make sure are going to cut last or cut first, I can select those specific things. So for example, if I wanted to make sure that this shape and this shape were the last things to cut, I can just put them on their own cut layer and set cut in layer order. And now if I bring up the preview, you can see that those things are the last things to cut. So right there. And it'll cut everything else first. These options are very common. If you're used to RDWorks or other laser software, most of this stuff is probably familiar. If you have never used laser software before, this stuff is probably not familiar. This is all listed in the documentation as well, so be sure to go through that. That's it for now.